Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that affects literally all of us, personality. It's basically the unique pattern of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that shapes how we relate to ourselves and to the world around us. We all have our quirks, right? But a personality disorder is a bit different. It's a long-lasting, deeply ingrained pattern of thinking and behaving that really gets in the way of everyday functioning, work, and relationships. These patterns are super inflexible, usually show up by early adulthood, and man, they can cause a lot of distress for the person experiencing them or for the people in their lives. To help make sense of this, the DSM-5 TR groups the 10 personality disorders into 3 specific buckets, or clusters A, B, and C. They do this because the disorders within each cluster share some pretty distinct, similar characteristics.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover understanding these conditions, dive into cluster A, then cluster B, followed by cluster C. We'll wrap up by looking at everyday traits, and finally, some general guidelines. Learning about these clusters is a total game changer for understanding human behavior, improving how we communicate, setting healthy boundaries, and knowing when it's time to seek professional mental health treatment. Just keep in mind, only a qualified professional can actually diagnose these. Lots of us might show a trait or two without actually meeting the criteria for a disorder.
Now, you might be wondering, why even learn about personality disorders? Well, understanding them helps us in some pretty major ways. It helps us improve our relationships with family, friends, and coworkers. We can start to recognize unhealthy patterns before they spiral into something destructive. It also lets us develop empathy while still holding on to our boundaries, which is absolutely crucial. Plus, it cuts down on unnecessary arguments, helps us know when someone might really benefit from professional counseling, and honestly, it protects our own emotional well-being. The whole point here isn't to just slap labels on people. It's to understand behaviors better so we can respond with wisdom. All right, let's jump right into cluster A, which focuses on odd or eccentric behaviors. Folks in this cluster often come across as socially distant, suspicious, or just a bit unusual. They might really struggle to trust others or connect emotionally. The 3 disorders we're looking at here are paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. First up is paranoid personality disorder. Imagine someone who constantly suspects that others are out to harm, deceive, betray, or manipulate them, and this happens even when there's literally little to no evidence to support it. Let's look at a real-life example. Picture a husband who notices his wife smiling while texting a coworker. Instead of just casually asking what's funny, he jumps straight to, "You're cheating on me." He starts checking her phone every day, interrogating her about every conversation, making huge accusations completely without proof. Or think about the workplace, an employee who is absolutely convinced his coworkers are secretly plotting to get him fired just because he saw them whispering briefly during a meeting.
So what are the common symptoms you'll see here? Well, they distrust almost everyone, read hidden meanings or threats into totally harmless comments, hold grudges for years, and are just extremely defensive while constantly questioning people's loyalty. So how should you respond? Stay honest, be consistent, definitely avoid using sarcasm, and whatever you do, don't get dragged into arguing over every single suspicion. Set firm boundaries. So instead of saying you're crazy, try saying something like, "I understand you're worried, let's look at the facts together."
Next, we have schizoid personality disorder. People with this disorder genuinely prefer being alone. They have very little desire for close relationships and usually come across as pretty emotionally detached. Take this real-life example. A coworker who eats lunch by himself every single day. He never goes to company parties, rarely smiles, and almost never shares anything personal about his life. And the thing is, he isn't angry. He simply enjoys his own company. Symptoms include preferring solitude, having little to no interest in friendships or romance, and rarely expressing strong emotions like happiness or sadness. If you're interacting with someone like this, the best response is just to respect their need for personal space. Don't force them to socialize. You can include them in things without pressuring them. Rounding out cluster A is schizotypal personality disorder. This one involves really unusual beliefs, eccentric appearances, odd speech, and a lot of discomfort in close relationships. For instance, imagine a college student who genuinely believes certain birds are secretly sending him messages. He wears highly unusual clothes every day and talks in bizarre metaphors that totally confuse his classmates. He isn't hallucinating. His ways of thinking are just very unusual. You'll see symptoms like magical thinking, odd beliefs, severe social anxiety, and peculiar speech. How do you respond here? Well, always treat them respectfully and avoid making fun of their beliefs. If these odd beliefs start interfering with their daily life, gently encourage them to get some professional help.
Okay, moving on to Section 3,
Cluster B. This group is all about dramatic, emotional, and erratic behaviors. We're talking intense emotions, impulsive actions, unstable relationships, and a lot of interpersonal drama. This cluster covers antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders. Let's start with antisocial personality disorder. Folks with this disorder repeatedly violate the rights of others, and they do it with almost zero guilt or remorse. Think of a ruthless businessman who lies to his clients and actively scams elderly customers. When he's finally caught, he just laughs it off and says, "Hey, that's just business." Common symptoms are chronic lying, manipulation, aggression, impulsivity, criminal behavior, and that total lack of remorse. So how should you handle this? Listen, don't expect guilt to magically change their behavior, because it won't. You need to maintain firm boundaries, thoroughly document your interactions at work, and absolutely protect yourself both financially and emotionally. Next up is borderline personality disorder, or BPD. This disorder is characterized by intensely overwhelming emotions and a really extreme fear of abandonment. Relationships tend to shift at lightning speed between complete idealization and intense anger. For example, a girlfriend might look at her partner and say, "You're the love of my life." But later that exact same day, she might scream, "I hate you, don't ever talk to me again." And that massive emotional swing, it might have been triggered just because her partner got stuck in traffic and came home 30 minutes late. The hallmarks of BPD include that intense fear of abandonment, those rapid mood swings, highly intense relationships, impulsive behaviors, identity confusion, and sometimes even self-harm or suicidal threats. When you're responding to someone with BPD, the most important thing is to remain calm. Validate their feelings, but be careful not to reinforce the unhealthy behaviors. Keep your boundaries incredibly consistent, avoid getting pulled into emotional power struggles, and gently encourage them to seek therapy. Then we have histrionic personality disorder. People dealing with this constantly seek attention and approval, and they tend to wildly exaggerate their emotions. Picture a coworker who makes a grand, dramatic entrance into every single meeting. If somebody else gets praised, she'll immediately and dramatically steer the conversation right back to herself. Symptoms include constant attention-seeking, easily being influenced by others, highly flirtatious behavior, and a desperate need for approval. The best way to respond? Give them appropriate attention, sure, but do not reward the dramatics. Keep conversations focused and avoid feeding into the manipulation. The last one in Cluster B is narcissistic personality disorder. These individuals project this massively exaggerated sense of importance, but underneath the surface, their self-esteem is usually incredibly fragile. For example, a manager who constantly brags, "No one here is as intelligent as I am." But the second an employee offers a mild suggestion, he blows up in anger because he takes it as a direct personal criticism. Symptoms are grandiosity, a deep need for admiration, a severe lack of empathy, a strong sense of entitlement, and high sensitivity to criticism. Your response? Don't rely on them for your own validation. Stay respectful, set very clear boundaries, and just avoid unnecessary arguments. You're really not going to win them.
All right, that brings us to Cluster C, which is characterized by anxious and fearful behaviors. Individuals in this cluster are generally just overwhelmed by anxiety, deep insecurity, fear, or rigid perfectionism. This includes avoidant, dependent, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorders.
Let's look at avoidant personality disorder. These people desperately want close relationships, but they avoid them like the plague because they are absolutely terrified of rejection. Imagine a highly talented employee who turns down every promotion because she's terrified she might make a mistake and be criticized, or a college student who knows all the answers but never, ever raises his hand. Symptoms include extreme sensitivity to criticism, a paralyzing fear of rejection, very low self-esteem, and avoiding social situations entirely. When interacting with them, offer lots of encouragement, avoid harsh criticism, celebrate their small wins, and do your best to create a really emotionally safe environment for them. Next is dependent personality disorder. Folks with this condition really struggle to make decisions without an excessive amount of reassurance from others. Think of an adult who literally calls his parents every single day for help making basic decisions, like what groceries to buy or whether to accept a new job. Common symptoms are severe difficulty making choices, a deep fear of being alone, that intense need for reassurance, and basically letting others control their major life choices. How to respond? Encourage their independence. Try to avoid making every decision for them. Praise their confidence and fully support them as they build up their gradual autonomy. Finally, we have Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder, or OCPD. Now, a quick caveat. This is explicitly different from OCD. People with OCPD are excessively fixated on perfection, order, rules, and control. And this rigid perfectionism usually completely derails their productivity and their relationships. A classic example is a supervisor who spends 3 straight hours adjusting font sizes and margins on a report, and as a result, totally misses the project deadline. His work might be technically perfect, but it's never actually finished.
Common OCPD symptoms include that crippling perfectionism, super rigid thinking, a refusal to delegate tasks, excessive devotion to work, and a relentless need for control. When working with someone with OCPD, be extremely organized. Provide crystal clear expectations from the jump. Avoid unnecessary power struggles over the tiny details, and try to gently help them prioritize actual progress over flawless perfection. Okay, Section 5. Recognizing these traits in everyday life. You'll likely notice some of these patterns in the people around you. In kids or teens, you might see an extreme fear of rejection, a persistent distrust of others, severe emotional outbursts, or perfectionism that goes way beyond normal shyness. In romantic relationships, it might look like constant, baseless accusations, intense fear of abandonment, emotional manipulation, or extreme dependency on a partner. In friendships, you might notice frequent conflicts, dramatic reactions, or a total lack of empathy. And in the workplace, distrust of coworkers, manipulation, the inability to take feedback, or project delaying perfectionism. But hear me on this. Having 1 or 2 of these behaviors every now and then does not mean someone has a personality disorder. We all have bad days. These conditions involve pervasive, persistent patterns that seriously impair someone's life and relationships.
So, how do we handle this in general? Regardless of the specific disorder, there are a few golden rules for interacting. First, remain calm and don't escalate the conflict. Listen with empathy, but keep your healthy boundaries firmly in place. Try not to take hurtful comments personally, and always communicate clearly and consistently. Most importantly, do not enable abusive or manipulative behavior. If their symptoms are interfering with daily life, encourage professional mental health treatment. And please protect your own emotional well-being. Compassion does not mean you have to tolerate abuse or neglect your own needs. Be patient, too. True, meaningful change takes a lot of time, personal insight, and the appropriate therapy. To wrap things up, the 3 clusters of personality disorders give us a really useful framework for understanding these deeply ingrained patterns of human behavior. You've got Cluster A with odd or suspicious behaviors, Cluster B with the dramatic and unpredictable, and Cluster C dominated by anxiety and perfectionism. Remember, recognizing these traits isn't about judging or labeling people. It's about responding to them with greater wisdom, real empathy, and proper boundaries. Whether you're dealing with your spouse, a child, a friend, a coworker, or a supervisor, understanding this stuff can massively improve communication, reduce conflicts, and highlight when professional support is actually beneficial. At the end of the day, greater psychological awareness strengthens both our relationships and our ability to care for ourselves and the people around us. So I'll leave you with this final thought. How will you use this awareness to strengthen your own relationships?